In the early hours of a Tuesday morning, the investigation into the disappearance of Daniel Brooks began not with a sense of immediate alarm, but with a quiet, creeping unease. Daniel was a man defined by his precision and his reliability, an architect whose life was as carefully structured as the blueprints he drew. For him to miss a crucial 9 a.m. client presentation without a call or a message was more than just unusual. It was fundamentally out of character. His business partner, Mark Ronson, was the first to notice something was wrong. He had arrived at their small shared office to find Daniel's desk empty, his computer cold. He called Daniel's cell phone repeatedly, each call rolling over to a dispassionate, automated voicemail message that felt increasingly sinister with every attempt. What could have possibly happened to a man who set 3 separate alarms just to ensure he was never late? By noon, that creeping unease had metastasized into genuine fear. Mark contacted Daniel's younger sister, Sarah Brooks, who confirmed she had not heard from him since a brief text exchange the previous evening. Together, they made the decision that so many families dread. They contacted the police and officially reported Daniel Brooks as a missing person. Daniel Brooks was, by all accounts, a man on an upward trajectory. At 32 years old, he had recently taken the formidable leap of starting his own architectural firm with Mark, a friend from university. He was talented, driven, and possessed a quiet confidence that inspired trust in his clients and loyalty in his friends. He poured his energy into his work, often staying late to perfect a design or prepare for a meeting. His personal life was a reflection of his professional one, orderly and aspirational. He was single, but maintained a close circle of friends. His most significant relationship was with his sister, Sarah, to whom he spoke almost daily. He was in the process of building his own dream home on a small plot of land just outside the city, a project that was both a personal passion and a showcase of his design philosophy. This dream, however, came with considerable pressure. Starting a new business and self-financing a home construction project had placed him under significant financial strain. He had taken out substantial loans and was operating on a tight budget, a fact he had confided in Sarah. It was a calculated risk, a temporary hardship he was confident he could overcome on the path to long-term success. Investigators from the local police department were dispatched to perform a welfare check at Daniel's apartment. They found the residence meticulously clean and orderly, almost unnervingly so. The bed was made, there were no dishes in the sink, and a book lay on the nightstand with a bookmark placed neatly halfway through. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of forced entry, and nothing appeared to be missing. The only things out of place were the things that were absent. Daniel himself was gone. His wallet and keys were not on the small entryway table, where he always left them. Most troublingly, his dark blue sedan, a vehicle he meticulously maintained, was not in its assigned spot in the building's parking garage. The scene offered no answers, only deeper questions. The initial theory, entertained by law enforcement, was that Daniel, overwhelmed by his financial burdens, had simply walked away from his life. It was a common enough scenario, especially for individuals facing intense personal and professional stress. Detectives began their work by treating the apartment not as a crime scene, but as the starting point of a search. They began the painstaking process of reconstructing Daniel's last known movements. His final day had been, by all accounts, completely ordinary. He had met with a client in the morning, a meeting that both the client and Mark Ronson described as positive and productive. He then had lunch with a friend, who later told police that Daniel seemed optimistic, excited about the progress on his new house. After lunch, Daniel had told his friend he was heading to the construction site to check on the foundation work that had recently been completed. Phone records confirmed he had been in that area during the afternoon. The last confirmed activity was a text message he sent to his sister, Sarah, at 7:15 p.m. It was a simple message, asking if she was free to talk later that week. She had replied in the affirmative a few minutes later, but he never read her response. After that final text, Daniel Brooks had vanished. His phone began going straight to voicemail shortly after 8 p.m., suggesting it was either turned off or the battery had died. The digital footprint that documented nearly every aspect of his modern life had abruptly ended, leaving a void of information that was as confounding as his physical absence. The first significant break in the case came 2 days later, but it only served to deepen the mystery. A patrol officer on a routine sweep of a multi-level public parking garage downtown flagged a vehicle that had been parked in the same spot for over 48 hours. The license plate was a match for Daniel Brooks's sedan. The discovery of the car, miles away from both his apartment and his construction site, was jarring. A forensics team was immediately dispatched to process the vehicle. They worked for hours under the harsh fluorescent lights of the garage, dusting for fingerprints, searching for fibers, and looking for any trace of what might have happened. The results of the forensic examination were frustratingly inconclusive. The car was clean, almost as if it had been detailed. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no foreign DNA. The driver's seat was adjusted to Daniel's height. A few of his personal belongings were inside, a pair of sunglasses, a portfolio with some old sketches, but his wallet, keys, and phone were missing. The location of the car was particularly puzzling. It was a busy, anonymous public garage, the kind of place where a car could sit unnoticed for days. It suggested that whoever left it there wanted it to be found eventually, but not immediately. It also seemed to rule out a simple carjacking, as the vehicle itself had been abandoned, not stolen for profit. With the discovery of the car, the theory that Daniel had voluntarily disappeared began to seem less plausible. Leaving his vehicle, a possession he valued, in such an impersonal location did not align with the portrait of a man meticulously planning a new life. It felt more like a deliberate attempt to sever a trail, to create confusion. The possibility of foul play, once a remote concern, now became the central focus of the investigation. Detectives turned their attention to Daniel's financial records, hoping to find a clue in the numbers. They obtained warrants for his bank accounts, credit cards, and business ledgers. The records confirmed what Sarah had told them. Daniel was financially leveraged. He had significant loans, and his business was not yet turning a substantial profit. However, the records also showed a man in control. He made every payment on time and managed his debt responsibly. There were no large, unexplained withdrawals, no signs of gambling or secret expenditures. His financial life, like the rest of his world, was disciplined and transparent. The numbers did not point to a man running from his problems, but rather one systematically working to solve them. While one team analyzed Daniel's finances, another began the laborious task of interviewing everyone in his orbit. They spoke with his friends, family, and colleagues. A consistent picture emerged of Daniel as a kind, fair-minded, and universally well-liked individual. He was described as a private person, but not a secretive one. No one could recall any recent conflicts, arguments, or strange behavior. It was during the interviews with his business clients that the first potential lead emerged. While most clients spoke of Daniel in glowing terms, the name Arthur Vance was mentioned with a note of caution. Vance was a wealthy and notoriously difficult property developer with whom Daniel's firm had recently contracted for a small commercial project. Mark Ronson informed detectives that Daniel had been having significant issues with Vance. The developer was constantly demanding changes to the project's scope while refusing to approve the corresponding cost increases. The relationship had become tense, culminating in a heated phone call the week before Daniel disappeared. Mark had overheard Daniel's end of the conversation, describing him as firm but professional, while the voice on the other end was audibly aggressive. detectives decided to pay Arthur Vance a visit. They found him at his sprawling, opulent estate, a man who exuded an air of entitlement and impatience. When questioned about Daniel Brooks, Vance was immediately defensive and dismissive. He admitted they had disagreed over business matters, but he characterized it as a standard negotiation, claiming such disputes were common in his line of work. Vance's demeanor immediately raised red flags for the investigators. He seemed unconcerned by the news of Daniel's disappearance and was evasive when asked about his own whereabouts on the night in question. He claimed he had been at home alone, working late in his office. It was a convenient alibi, one that was impossible to immediately verify or disprove. The detectives requested access to Daniel's email account, and what they found there intensified their focus on Arthur Vance. In the days leading up to his disappearance, Daniel had received a series of increasingly hostile emails from the developer. The messages were filled with accusations of incompetence and inflated invoices, culminating in a final, ominous email sent just 2 days before Daniel vanished. It read, "You will regret trying to cheat me. People who cross me learn their lesson." This was more than a business dispute. It was a written threat. Arthur Vance, with his aggressive personality, flimsy alibi, and documented hostility toward the victim, was elevated from a person of interest to the primary suspect in the investigation. The theory was straightforward. A business argument had escalated, and Vance, a man used to getting his way, had silenced the architect who dared to stand up to him. The investigation into Vance began in earnest. Detectives executed a search warrant on his home and office, seizing computers and financial records. They combed through his communications, looking for any link to Daniel's disappearance. They also put him under surveillance, hoping he would make a mistake or lead them to more evidence. Vance, for his part, hired a high-profile defense attorney and refused to speak further with the police. His lawyer issued a public statement decrying the investigation as a witch hunt against a successful businessman, claiming the police were targeting his client simply because of his wealth and reputation. The media picked up the story, and the case of the missing architect and the belligerent developer became local news. For weeks, the investigation revolved almost entirely around Arthur Vance. Detectives meticulously checked his financial records, searching for any unusual payments that could indicate a hired hand. They analyzed cell tower data for his phone, which showed him in the vicinity of his home on the night Daniel disappeared. But the data was not precise enough to completely rule out a short trip elsewhere. The pressure on the department was immense. Daniel's family was desperate for answers, and the public was captivated by the narrative of a potential murder-for-hire plot involving a powerful local figure. Yet, despite the intense focus on Vance, the police were unable to find any concrete evidence directly linking him to Daniel's disappearance. There was no physical evidence, no witness, and no confession. All they had was a strong motive and a mountain of circumstantial suspicion. The turning point that cleared Arthur Vance came from an unexpected source. A diligent detective, frustrated by the lack of progress, decided to canvass Vance's neighborhood again, this time expanding the search radius. He discovered a homeowner several houses down who had a newly installed high-definition security system. The owner had been on vacation and had not been contacted during the initial canvass. The police reviewed the footage from the camera, which had a partial view of the road leading to Vance's estate. At 8:30 p.m. on the night Daniel disappeared, the camera captured a clear image of a food delivery vehicle turning onto Vance's street. A follow-up with the delivery company, and the driver confirmed the order. The driver provided a detailed receipt with a timestamp and a credit card signature from Arthur Vance. Crucially, the driver remembered the encounter because Vance had answered the door himself and had engaged him in a lengthy, rambling conversation about the landscaping. GPS data from the delivery driver's vehicle confirmed his location and the time. This evidence corroborated Vance's alibi completely. He had been at home, just as he claimed. The threatening emails, it seemed, were nothing more than the blustering of an arrogant man used to intimidating people to get what he wanted. With the exoneration of their only suspect, the investigation into Daniel Brooks's disappearance came to a grinding halt. The police had exhausted their most promising lead, and the case file was now filled with dead ends. The trail had gone cold. A sense of deep frustration settled over the detectives, and, more profoundly, over Daniel's family. They were no closer to finding him than they had been on the day he vanished. Months passed with no new leads. The seasons changed. The public's attention moved on to other stories. For the police, the case remained open but inactive, a stack of binders on a shelf filled with unanswered questions. For Sarah Brooks, however, the passage of time did nothing to dull the pain or the desperate need for resolution. She continued to call the lead detective every week, her voice a constant, heartbreaking reminder of the case's failure. Then, 10 months after Daniel had last been seen, a breakthrough occurred, one that was as tragic as it was inevitable. A pair of hikers, venturing off a marked trail in a remote section of a state park nearly 50 miles from the city, discovered what appeared to be human remains, partially buried under a pile of leaves and rocks. The location was rugged and isolated, a place few people would ever have a reason to go. Forensic investigators and a team from the medical examiner's office were called to the scene. They carefully excavated the area and recovered a partial skeleton. The state of the remains indicated they had been there for a significant amount of time, exposed to the elements and animal activity. The remains were transported to the medical examiner's office, where a forensic anthropologist and an odontologist went to work. Using dental records that had been on file since the early days of the investigation, they were able to make a positive identification. The search for Daniel Brooks was over. He had been found. The autopsy revealed the cause of death was multiple instances of blunt force trauma to the skull. Daniel Brooks had been murdered. The case officially shifted from a missing person investigation to a homicide. The discovery of his body, while providing a devastating certainty to his family, gave investigators a new, albeit challenging place to focus their efforts: the crime scene. Detectives and forensic teams returned to the remote patch of woods where Daniel's body had been found. They conducted a grid search of the area, meticulously combing through the underbrush for any piece of evidence that might have been left behind. They were looking for anything: a weapon, a footprint, a stray fiber, a button from a coat. But 10 months of rain, snow, and sun had done their work. The crime scene was heavily degraded. The ground had been washed clean by the weather, and any potential evidence had been scattered or destroyed. They found no murder weapon and no personal effects belonging to Daniel. The killer had chosen the location well, relying on nature and time to erase their tracks. The discovery of the body in such a remote location, far from where his car had been found, suggested a killer who was familiar with the area and who had gone to great lengths to conceal his crime. It pointed to a premeditated act, not a random crime of opportunity. Whoever had killed Daniel had a plan. With no new physical evidence, detectives were forced to re-examine the old case files. They re-interviewed everyone from Mark Ronson to the friends Daniel had lunched with on his last day. They went over the timeline again and again, searching for a detail they might have missed, a small inconsistency that could break the case open. But every path led back to the same frustrating silence. The investigation had entered a new phase of stagnation. The initial flurry of activity following the discovery of the body subsided, replaced by the grim reality that they were no closer to finding the killer. The case file grew thicker with reports detailing negative results and interviews that led nowhere. Another year went by, then another. The Daniel Brooks homicide was officially designated a cold case. The original detectives were reassigned, and the case files were moved to a long-term storage room in the basement of the police department. For the outside world, the story was a forgotten tragedy. For Sarah Brooks, it was an open wound that refused to heal. She established a small charitable foundation in her brother's name, funding scholarships for promising young architecture students, determined that his legacy would be one of creation, not destruction. It was nearly 3 years after Daniel's murder that a flicker of hope was rekindled. A new detective, a man named James Corbin, was assigned to the department's fledgling cold case unit. Corbin had a reputation as a methodical, patient investigator who believed that no case was truly unsolvable. He believed that somewhere in the boxes of old files, there was a key waiting to be found. Corbin began his review by reading every single page of the Daniel Brooks file, absorbing the details of the initial investigation, the false lead with Arthur Vance, and the frustrating lack of evidence. He didn't look for a smoking gun. He looked for the quiet whispers, the details that seemed insignificant at the time, but might hold new meaning with fresh eyes and the benefit of hindsight. His attention was drawn back to the initial financial investigation. While the original detectives had focused on large-scale debts and potential motives for disappearance, Corbin decided to scrutinize the smaller, more routine transactions. He requested the full digital records from Daniel's business bank account, not just the paper summaries the first team had reviewed. Using updated data analysis software, Corbin began to sift through thousands of transactions. He was looking for patterns, anomalies, anything that deviated from Daniel's otherwise predictable financial behavior. And then he found it. It was a series of 5 small payments, made over a period of 2 months, to a company named Contractor. The payments were not, in themselves, suspicious. Daniel was building a house, and payments to contractors were expected. What was strange were the amounts. They were not round numbers that corresponded to invoices. They were odd, specific figures. $485.50, $512.25, $495. Furthermore, they were direct transfers from Daniel's business account, not payments processed through the general contractor overseeing the home build, which was the standard procedure. Corbin cross-referenced the name with the original case file. Carter Contracting belonged to a man named Liam Carter, a subcontractor who had been hired to pour the concrete foundation for Daniel's new home. The file contained a single sheet of paper summarizing an interview with him. It was brief. Carter had told the original detectives that he had completed his work, been paid in full, and had a good working relationship with Daniel. He was quickly dismissed as having no relevant information. Corbin felt a professional curiosity stir. Why was Daniel making these strange, off-the-books payments directly to a subcontractor? He decided to dig deeper into Liam Carter. A standard background check from the initial investigation had shown nothing of note, but Corbin ran a new, more comprehensive search, one that included sealed records and minor civil judgments from other jurisdictions. This time, the results were different. Liam Carter had a history of financial trouble. He had declared bankruptcy 5 years prior. More significantly, he had 2 prior civil judgments against him for breach of contract, filed by clients who accused him of using substandard materials and overcharging for labor. There was also a sealed misdemeanor charge for petty fraud from a decade earlier that had been dismissed. Liam Carter was not just a simple contractor. He was a man with a documented pattern of cutting corners and dishonest dealings. This new information cast the small, direct payments in a much more sinister light. They didn't look like legitimate business transactions anymore. They looked like hush money. Corbin began to formulate a new theory. What if Liam Carter had done something wrong on the construction site, used cheap concrete, violated a building code, and Daniel, with his meticulous eye for detail, had discovered it? The payments could have been Carter trying to quietly fix the problem, or worse, they could have been extortion. Corbin knew he needed more than a theory. He decided to revisit the other people who had worked at the construction site. The original detectives had interviewed the general contractor and the heads of the various subcontracting crews. But Corbin wanted to talk to the laborers, the people who were on the ground every day. He believed that someone must have seen or heard something. He tracked down a half-dozen men who had worked on the framing and electrical systems shortly after Carter's crew had finished the foundation. Most of them remembered little, the Daniel Brooks project being just one of many jobs from years ago. But one man, a younger carpenter named Ben, hesitated when Corbin asked about Liam Carter. Corbin sensed the hesitation and gently pressed him. Ben, who had been just an apprentice at the time, finally opened up. He admitted that he had been afraid to speak up during the initial investigation, worried about losing his job. He told Corbin that he had witnessed a furious argument between Liam Carter and Daniel Brooks about a week before Daniel disappeared. Ben recounted the scene vividly. Daniel had been holding a set of invoices and calmly pointing out a discrepancy to Carter. He said that Carter had become enraged, his voice rising, accusing Daniel of trying to shortchange him. Ben remembered Daniel staying professional, explaining that the issue wasn't about payment, but about the delivery receipts for materials not matching the amount of concrete that was billed. Liam had gotten right in Daniel's face, shouting and jabbing his finger at him before storming off. This was the catalyst Corbin had been searching for. The witness account transformed Liam Carter from a peripheral figure into a person with a clear, direct, and recent conflict with the victim. The argument wasn't about Daniel owing Liam money. It was about Daniel having discovered that Liam was cheating him. Daniel, a man of integrity, would not have let that go. Corbin's theory now had solid ground. Daniel had uncovered Liam's fraud. The small payments were likely Liam's desperate attempts to pay Daniel back for the stolen materials, to avoid being reported to the general contractor and the state licensing board, which would have ruined his business. The final, fatal confrontation must have occurred when Daniel realized the full extent of the deception and decided he had to take official action. Armed with this new information, Corbin went to a judge and obtained warrants for everything related to Liam Carter. He wanted access to his complete financial history, his phone records, and, most importantly, the historical location data from his cell phone provider for the 48-hour period when Daniel disappeared. In the early days of the investigation, this kind of specific historical GPS tracking was not as readily available or commonly used, but technology had advanced. When the data from the phone company came in, it was the definitive piece of evidence Corbin had been hoping for. It was the digital ghost that would finally tell the story of that terrible night. The GPS pings from Liam Carter's phone painted a damning timeline. On the evening Daniel disappeared, Liam's phone was tracked from his own home to the vicinity of Daniel's construction site around 7:30 p.m. It remained there for approximately 90 minutes. Then the phone began to move. It traveled north, away from the city, on a route that led directly to the remote state park. The data showed the phone stopping for over an hour in the exact isolated area where Daniel's body would later be discovered. The timeline continued. From the park, the phone traveled back toward the city, but it didn't go to Liam's house. Instead, it moved to the downtown core, stopping for approximately 15 minutes. The location data was precise enough to place the phone within a 1-block radius of the public parking garage where Daniel's car had been abandoned. From there, the phone finally traveled back to Liam Carter's residential address, arriving just after 2 a.m. It was the entire murder, disposal, and cover-up, all mapped out in cold, irrefutable data points. Liam Carter had not only been at the scene of the murder and the body disposal site, but he had also been at the location where the victim's car was dumped. There was no plausible explanation for this sequence of movements. Detective Corbin finally had his killer. A team of officers was dispatched to Liam Carter's home. He was living in the same modest suburban house he had been in for years, his contracting business still in operation. He appeared shocked when the police arrived with a warrant for his arrest for the murder of Daniel Brooks. He was taken into custody without incident, protesting his innocence the entire way. In the interrogation room, Liam initially presented a calm and confident demeanor. He denied everything. He claimed he barely knew Daniel Brooks and hadn't seen him in months before his disappearance. He stuck to the same story he had told the original investigators 3 years earlier. He had done his job, gotten paid, and moved on. Detective Corbin let him talk, let him build the foundation of his lies. Then he calmly laid a series of large maps on the table. He placed a printed timeline next to them. He began to walk Liam through the GPS data, pointing to each location, each timestamp. He showed him the map of the construction site, then the route to the state park, then the location of the abandoned car. As Liam Carter saw the evidence laid out before him, his composure began to crack. His denials became weaker, his explanations more convoluted. He claimed his phone must have been stolen, then suggested the data was wrong. Corbin systematically dismantled each lie with calm, factual precision. The weight of the digital evidence was simply too heavy. Finally, after hours of interrogation, Liam Carter broke. The facade of the wronged, innocent man crumbled, replaced by the pathetic reality of a cornered criminal. He began to confess, the words spilling out in a torrent of self-pity and excuses. The motive was exactly as Corbin had theorized: petty greed that had spiraled into catastrophic violence. Liam admitted he had been skimming materials from his jobs for years, a little here, a little there, to pad his profits. But Daniel Brooks, with his architect's eye and obsession with detail, had noticed. He had seen the receipts and known that the amount of concrete delivered wasn't enough for a foundation of that specification. Daniel had confronted him privately, offering him a chance to make it right without involving the general contractor. That was the reason for the series of small payments. It was Liam trying to pay back the stolen money. But Daniel kept digging and realized the fraud was more extensive than he initially thought. He found evidence that Liam had done the same thing on other projects. On that final evening, Daniel had called Liam and told him to meet him at the construction site. He informed him that he could no longer handle the matter privately. He had a professional and ethical obligation to report him to the contractor's licensing board and the police. For Liam, this was a death sentence for his career and his reputation. He told Corbin that he had panicked. He went to the site intending to beg Daniel to change his mind. But in the back of his truck, under a pile of tools, was a heavy industrial-grade wrench. He said he didn't know why he picked it up. In a fit of rage and desperation, as Daniel turned to walk away, Liam struck him from behind. The rest of the confession matched the GPS data perfectly. He had put Daniel's body in his own truck, driven to the remote park, a place he knew from his youth, and buried him in a shallow grave. Then, in a calculated move to throw off police, he had driven Daniel's car into the city and left it in the anonymous parking garage, taking Daniel's wallet and phone with him and disposing of them in a dumpster miles away. He had destroyed the murder weapon and believed he had committed the perfect crime. The confession brought a horrifying conclusion to a mystery that had haunted a family and a police department for 3 long years. The news of Liam Carter's arrest sent a shockwave through the community. He was the killer who had hidden in plain sight, a seemingly ordinary man who had been interviewed and dismissed at the very start of the investigation. Arthur Vance, the man who had lived under a cloud of public suspicion for years, was formally and publicly exonerated. The initial investigators faced internal scrutiny for their tunnel vision, a stark reminder of how focusing too heavily on one promising suspect can cause you to miss the real culprit standing right beside them. Liam Carter's trial was swift. The prosecution presented the GPS data and his detailed confession, a combination of evidence that was simply insurmountable. His defense attorney attempted to argue that the killing was not premeditated, that it was a spontaneous act of rage, but the jury did not agree. The calculated steps Liam took to hide the body and create a false trail with the car pointed to a mind that was thinking clearly. Even in the immediate aftermath of the murder, he was found guilty of first-degree murder. At his sentencing, the judge spoke of the profound callousness of his actions. Liam Carter had taken a man's life, not over a grand passion or a deep-seated hatred, but to cover up a series of pathetic, greedy thefts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Throughout the trial and sentencing, he showed no remorse, only a sullen resentment at having been caught. The most powerful moment of the proceedings came when Sarah Brooks took the stand to deliver her victim impact statement. She did not speak to the killer, but to the court and to the memory of her brother. She spoke of Daniel's kindness, his quiet ambition, and his dream of building a home where he could one day raise a family. She described the gaping void his absence had left, a permanent emptiness in the lives of everyone who loved him. In the end, justice was served, but it was a hollow victory. A good and decent man was dead, his future stolen from him over a few $1,000s worth of concrete. Daniel Brooks was murdered because he was honest, because he was meticulous, and because he believed in doing the right thing. His death was a senseless tragedy, a testament to the destructive power of greed and the desperate actions of a man who would rather kill than face the consequences of his own choices. The case was finally closed, but the loss of a life like Daniel's would endure forever. If you found this case compelling, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on similar true crime investigations. The details of these stories are often tragic, but understanding them is a crucial step in honoring the victims and appreciating the tireless work that goes into finding justice. Until next time, stay aware, stay compassionate, and look out for one another.